right, welcome back, guys. So let's see here. So, so like I said, what we would do is we would do a brief example of kind of how we would do an introductory, it's like how we do an ethical discussion for this course. All right. So let's kind of read our example. It's called Heinz dilemma. All right. The friend of mine that gave me this sent me this kind of as an example of how you might look visually at who these people are. Now, this is not a real life incident, although it could represent something that could happen in real life. And so what you have, well, you can read it. I'll also read it with you. All right. So Heinz's wife, Wanda, has been diagnosed with a rare disease, which is thought to be incurable. However, a certain pharmacist in the town, Bob, has just invented a cure for the disease. Bob has demonstrated that the cure works perfectly, but because of government bureaucracy, the drug has not yet been approved for use and is therefore not covered by Heinz's insurance policy. Bob is willing to sell the cure to Heinz, but is charging $2 million. And it cost him $20,000 to develop the drug in the first place. If Heinz borrows money from every source he can think of, family, friends, gets a loan from a bank, and even sells his house and his car, he will only be able to get together $1 million, about half of the amount that he needs, right? So Heinz decides that he's going to break into Bob's house and steal the drug to be able to give it to his wife. All right. So, question. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about the different decisions that are being made by the people involved? There's a lot going on here, right? So Heinz's decision to break into Bob's house and steal the drug, right? That's one decision that we can think of. Okay, what about Bob and his decision to charge 100 times what it cost him to make the drug in the first place, right? Why would he do that? Why? And is that okay? Is that a good thing, right? The government being slow to approve the drug for use, right? The insurance company not covering a drug's use because it's not approved for use by the government. Right? All of these things are questions that we would ask in this situation. So I'm going to open up the discussion to you guys. Right? So what do you think? So Brock says Bob can just break into Heinz's house and steal it back, so you can just go and. But what if Heinz has already given it to his wife? How will Bob steal it back then? Assuming that it's like a pill that you take or an injectable, like a vaccine or something. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I want you guys to open up your microphones and talk freely.
Greetings. First of all, my English can be a little bit rusty, but I will try to express myself. Okay. How I see the problem is, let's say in this dilemma there is no Wanda. Let's say Heinz wants the cure for himself. Let's say. So that would be two person, and Heinz would do it for himself. So would we again say Heinz doing it because there is no other option? So if we say that, we can say that Bob can do it too, because Bob will be losing $1 million at the end of the day. So maybe it's really crucial. So what I'm trying to say, let's say Wanda is not Heinz's wife, but Bob's wife, and Bob needs a $1 million to save Wanda. So can we say if Heinz break in and steals the cure, which will help the Wanda, who's Bob's wife? So at the end of the day, Bob will be helpless in that situation. So for me, what Heinz doing is wrong. I guess I can say it's wrong. But if I add something, at the end of the day, why I said Bob can always break into Heinz house and steal it back is because Heinz decided to do it. If Bob also can decide to steal it back, that's okay. But if can't, then there's not Bob can't do anything. That's my point of view, I guess.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing. So what about some of the others? Do you have any comments of your own on this particular question, or the dilemma question, or on Burak's comments? So I noticed the other Burak, you gave the thumbs up for the comment he made. So what do you think on this? All right, so I'll read it out since Burak says he has a lot of background noise. So the question he has is, Wanda is ill or sick, but there is nothing mentioned about how ill she is. So can't she wait until government approves the drug? So that's a good question. That is a piece of information we're not given in this, right? And I would say that actually brings up a great point for me. Is a lot of times in these ethical dilemmas or these questions of right and wrong or good and bad, sometimes we want to have kind of a blanket. Humans, I say we as in human beings, we oftentimes want to have a blanket kind of this is the correct answer all the time for these situations, right? But every situation is a little bit different, right? And so there's some piece of information here that we're not given. Burak brings up is we don't know how long Wanda has until this disease will either kill her or make her, it might not even be death, it could just make her paralyzed or in a coma or something like that, right? But we don't know how long until that happens. And so could she wait, right? So yeah, good. So that's a good question. Is what if it's a short time? If it's a short time, then that if it's a longer time, then that makes Heinz's decision to steal harder to justify, I think is probably what Burak is getting at, right? And so, yeah, good point. So what, anyone else, does anyone else have some comments about our friends Heinz, Wanda, and Bob?
Hello.
Yes. So, so I see. So, Shirin, Azazi. Do you go by Shirin? Do you go by Azazi? Both?
Yes, Shirin Azazi is my one of my surnames. I have two surnames.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So Shirin. Okay.
It's okay. Yes, Shirin. Thank you. I agree with Burak. We don't know, for example, what risks Bob was taken developing this cure, or what risk he would be giving the cure, an unapproved cure, to Heinz. And we don't know if Heinz talked to Bob after he has $1 million. So we can't judge Bob here, I think.
So my understanding of what you said is you're saying that after he was able to get $1 million, that that maybe Heinz could negotiate with Bob to reduce the cost. Okay, good. So what about Bob's decision to sell the drug for 100 times what it cost him to make it? Does that seem reasonable, or is that a problem?
We don't know the risks he took, I think, because the cure is unapproved yet, and maybe after giving the cure, there will be some health issues. Maybe it's not tested enough. I don't know.
Yeah, good point too. Yeah. Right. Burak, good point that because right now the only cure available is Bob's, then kind of Bob kind of has the ability to set the price whatever he wants it to be, right? And so, but I think what I was getting at there, what I was asking was, is there a part of us that feels kind of like we want to judge Bob a little bit, right? I'm thinking some people might respond to say, well, why is Bob charging this much? I don't understand. Well, if it costs him only $20,000 to develop the drug, why could he charge that much? That seems unreasonable. Not that it's illegal. Again, one of the things that we need to be careful about is assuming that legal equals ethical, right? Because that's not always the case. Sometimes illegal things might be ethical. Sometimes legal things might be unethical, right? And so it's legal for him to charge whatever he wants, considering that the drug has no approval by the government yet or any kind of governmental oversight. Right? Yeah. Yeah, right. Right. So, and yeah, we don't know anything about what the pricing might be after if the government approves it. Not even when, but if the government approves it. Right. Good point. Yeah.
Hi, sir.
Sure.
This is Otman.
All right.
I would like to ask the verification methods. It is written that the cure works perfectly, but what are the verifications? Are there really verified clearly or scientifically?
So, oh, sorry, my mic was not on. So yeah, so what Othman brings up is how do we know that it actually really does work perfectly? Bob has demonstrated that, but because of government bureaucracy, it hasn't been approved. But we don't. So it was interesting to have this particular dilemma because I was actually the first time I taught this course was before the pandemic. Before we entered the pandemic times, or maybe it was the first semester of the pandemic. But it was interesting to have this question about cures and diseases and drug manufacturers and government bureaucracy. It was interesting to have this discussion at the beginning of the pandemic because there was a lot of that going on, right? Where you had companies claiming to have vaccines that were available. You had other specifically in America, there was a particular chemical, I cannot remember the name of it right now, one of you might know, that was claiming to be a cure that was a non-vaccine cure. or cure or preventative for getting COVID, right? But basically, there was a lot of waiting that we had to do for groups like the FDA, the American organization that approves drugs for use, and we had to wait. And people were like, well, "What?" And of course, it kind of went both ways, right? Some people were complaining that the FDA was taking too long, while people were getting ill and dying from COVID. Other people were complaining that the FDA approved these vaccines too quickly, and we didn't actually know all the side effects, right? And so, so we could get frustrated that the government, in our example here, in our dilemma example here, that the government doesn't approve quickly enough. But at the same time, as some of you have pointed out here, that if we don't know all the side effects, yeah, maybe it cures that disease, but maybe it does some other side effect that is not as good, right? That is even worse, right? But we may not know that yet, right? So it's a good point. All right. So any other thoughts? Any other comments towards this particular discussion? Yeah, I encourage you to look at this some more and even like kind of consider it some more, because one of the things I like about this particular one to start off with is there's at least 4 different people or groups that we might be tempted to judge their actions and judge their decisions, right? One is clearly at the very end, the Heinz's decision to steal the drug. We may want to judge that decision. We might want to judge Bob's decision to charge more than it cost, and that much more than it cost, in order to sell the drug. We might be wanting to judge we're going backwards, right? We might want to judge the insurance company for not approving a drug, even though it's been, by the stories text, shown to be a cure, even though it hasn't been government approved. We might be judging the government. We might be judging the government's bureaucracy in not approving the drug itself. And actually, depending on your viewpoint of how the world and the universe works, there might even be a fifth. There might even be a fifth person or group to judge as well, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that on the last slide here. So let's talk about that, because that is a great question, Barack. And in fact, that is one of the things that's a modification of what's called the trolley problem. And we're definitely going to discuss the trolley problem this year. If you want to get an advanced look at it, I encourage you to Google search trolley problem. I'll type it in here into the chat. So I encourage you to look into that one, because it's a very interesting modification of what happens when people involved become someone close to us instead of just an unknown other person, right? Good, because that's a great point. All right, so let me go forward here. Okay, so the idea here is there a way to unpin this? I would like this. Are you guys seeing this thing up top that says presenting and stuff? I would like that to not be there. Okay, maybe that works. Okay. Okay, so this was part of the slides that my friend who's he's not a philosopher. His degree is in counseling, but he's somewhat of a philosopher as well. But these are some terms down at the bottom that you may have heard in terms of how to view the world, how to view what is good and bad. So you might find yourself in one of these boxes, but you might also not at the same time. So and when we get through this flow chart in a moment. I'll explain what I said earlier about there possibly being a fifth person that we could judge their behavior in this, because they aren't explicitly listed in the text as part of the story, but depending on your view of the universe, they might be there. Okay, they might be involved in this story. Okay, and we'll talk about who that is in just a moment. All right. So, are good and evil absolute objective realities? So, question number one that you need to answer for someone viewing the world. Okay, no, they're relative. Good and evil, good and bad are objective. Or sorry, are subjective. What's good for you might be bad for someone else, and that's okay. If that's your answer to that, no, they're not objective, then you're going, so you need to answer no or yes to that. Okay, so if no, okay, then who determines their meaning for particular times and places? Because we use those words, right? We use good and evil. We use good and bad. How do you determine what is good and what is bad for particular times and places? For example, coming from my own home country, at one point in America's history, we thought it was good and okay to own people, to have slaves, right? We no longer, as a society believe that to be true, and so at one point we believed it was good, and now we don't, right? So who determines that? How did we determine that? I mean, America did fight a civil war over it. But was that how we determined it? Right. How do we determine what's good and evil? Well, society at large. If your answer is society, we together, if most of the people believe that slavery is bad, then slavery is bad. If most of the people believe that slavery is good, then slavery is good, right? If that's your answer to that question, then we would classify that as a cultural relativistic belief about how to determine good and evil. Okay, if you determine what's good and bad for you, and I determine what's good and bad for me, and we would say you cannot really reasonably put that onto someone else. So if something's good for me, like, I can't make you believe that. I can tell you why I believe that's to be true, but it's still, in my belief, it's still up to you to determine that for yourself. If that's what I believe, then we would call you a subjectivist, right? So that's what's considered subjectivist ethics. Okay. All right. So it looks like all of the rest of these, excuse me, all of the rest of these are going to fall under the good and evil are, I guess you're looking at it like this. So all of the rest of these are going to be good and evil, good and bad are absolute, objective, like they're outside of us. Okay. All right. If you believe in a God, then God does. Okay, God determines this for us. We have no place in this, that it's entirely up to him or them, if you believe in more than one, that kind of idea. Okay, then we would call that the divine command theory. By the way, this is what I meant when I said the fifth person that may be involved in the Heinz, Wanda, Bob story. This might be the question of, why was Wanda ill? Why was Wanda sick in the first place? Right? Did God make her sick? Even if you don't believe in God causes all things to happen but allowed it, right? So there's a particular view of theism called deism that believes that God created the universe. God created the universe and the earth and everything in it, and then just kind of left and just kind of stopped being involved, right? And so if you believe, so the deist would not necessarily believe that God made Wanda sick, but that God created the universe with illness, all right? And so So you might put some blame on him or it or whatever you want to call the God in that situation. Okay. All right. So if God does, then that would be the divine command theory. All right. Who determines their meaning? Who determines good and evil? We worked it out by reason. So we thought about it. We reasoned it out. We figured it out. Basically, the viewpoint on slavery on this would be saying that slavery's always been wrong, right? It's just that we didn't know it before, and now we've worked it out and figured out that slavery is not okay. All right. So if that's you, all right, then how do you define what good is? Okay, because you got to kind of figure out what those terms mean. Okay. Well, if good is things that lead to happiness, so good is happy, bad is sad, good is pleasure, bad is anger or pain, right? If those are if that's kind of how you understand good and evil or good and bad to be, then well, I really need to figure out, I need to do a better job of putting these into leading to the spot thing, right? Right. Or you could have good is logically consistent with the universe, right? Basically, good is when the universe makes sense and you are consistent with that kind of idea. So actually, this one's going to lead to a particular spot, which is Kant, right? So Immanuel Kant would have said this, that if you are in harmony with the way the universe works, then you are in a good place. If you are not in harmony with the way the universe works, then you are be in a bad situation. All right. Another possibility for definition for good would be good is what's called human flourishing. So not necessarily happiness. I'm not necessarily happy, but people are doing good, right? People are doing well. They are human flourishing. People are getting enough to eat. People are enjoying life. People are their needs are being met. So good. So if you are someone who, let me think of a good example. If you are someone who believes strongly in that human behavior is contributing to climate change and that's a danger that will affect us and affect our children in the future, then you would say it is good to do things that would reduce that impact on the environment. So it'd be good to drive less in order to help the environment. It would be good to reduce the amount of factory output that contributes to climate change, because it's not just about current human flourishing, but also future as well. Okay, so if you are someone in that position, all right. All right, so now our slide is good. So these are, so kind of think through, okay, how do you define good? So again, good, that means you're logically consistent with the universe. We're going to go Kant on that. Okay, good that leads, which leads to happiness. Well, whose happiness? All right, so now we have another question. Okay, what does happiness mean? Just general happiness in the universe. Everybody's happy. Like, my dog is happy, and my kids are happy, and my neighbor's happy, right? This would be utilitarianism would be the name we would apply to that. My happiness is the only happiness that's important, right? I don't care about my dog. If he's happy, that's great, but if his happiness comes at my happiness's expense, then I'm not okay with that. All right, that would, if that's kind of how you view the world, we would put you as an objectivist, all right? And then let's see, whose happiness? Good, human flourishing. That happiness. All right. Who gets a say in what counts as flourishing? So what does it mean for the human race to be doing well? Right. Okay. So I use climate change as an example because it's one of those things that at least in America is debated somewhat. But good and evil things in Earth versus the universe. I guess that depends on your beliefs about extraterrestrial and alien activity and alien existence. Yeah, the Earth is the only planet we know right now, so so a lot of our discussion will probably center on that a bit. But good question there, yeah, good question, Barak. All right, let's see. We can discuss that more in a moment. All right, so who gets a say in what counts as flourishing? Like, what does it mean for humanity to be doing well, for people to be getting their basic needs met? And what does it mean that something is a need versus a want, or even whatever the opposite of a need, a luxury, maybe, right? Because we might all agree that food is a need. We might not all agree that McDonald's food is a need. My oldest son would see his time watching Netflix or YouTube or something like that as a need, right? But I don't necessarily see it that way. I don't see, excuse me, I don't see his need for Netflix. I see that more as a luxury, right? So, but who gets to say what counts as flourishing, as human beings doing well? All right. So, a couple of options would be, one would be men mostly. So historically, the human race has been led mostly by men, and so if you believe that men are the ones that are most what's the word? Most capable of being able to make these decisions for the rest of the human race, then that would put you into the Aristotelian virtue ethics. Aristotle would have mostly been responsible for teaching this, but then there's also saying that, well, women should have a say too, because we should listen to them because they probably know a thing or two. Then currently that title would go to what's called the feminist virtue ethics. Now, I want to also point out that for some of you, this might be the first time you've ever thought about different ways of viewing good and evil being broken down into this many different boxes, right? There's 8 boxes here at the bottom. I can say that even the person that shared this with me said that this is not even close to the different gosh, what's the word? The different finer points that people could make, because this doesn't even ask all of the questions. Because even for example here, this question of who determines their meaning of good and evil, God does, puts you into this box of the divine command theory. Well, you guys know as well as I do that in the world there are many different definitions for what the word God means, right? And so even which God are we talking about, and therefore how does that work, right? And so even those 8 boxes, have their own smaller sub boxes, right, and stuff like that, right? But the reason why I wanted to introduce this, the reason why I start off my semesters teaching this course with this is because I want us to understand that there are many, many different ways of viewing the world. There are many different ways of viewing good and bad, and what is good and what does bad even mean, and how do we define that? And so I hope that even understanding different ways of viewing the world helps me with my own relationships with my wife and with my kids, because their understanding of good and bad, like I just gave an example where my son believes very strongly that for him not to be able to watch YouTube in a day means that he was somehow stolen from, or he did not have a good day simply because he didn't get to watch a YouTube video or something. And whereas for me, I'm like, I don't see why that's bad, right? And so viewing the world in different ways is very common, right? So just here, this might help you be able to also understand kind of, I don't know how many of you have ever questioned on your own. How do I define good and evil? How do I define good and bad? Right? Do I believe that they're absolute? Yes or no? Right? If no, well, all these other questions might come out of that. And if yes, then what questions come out of that as well? Okay. All right. So, any comments about this particular thing? I do want to come back to Burak's comment there about the climate change. Climate change would be something that I would say, even is it affecting Earth or not? Is it as bad as the scientists say or not? Is human activity contributing to it or not? These are all questions that people are asking. But even like from the standpoint of the debates that I've heard about it, tend to be along the lines of, one, some people question whether or not it's true or not. Some people say, well, even if it is true, is it worth some of the is it worth some of the changes we would have to make to our lifestyle in order to curb it? If we made those changes, would it even affect climate change in a positive way or not? These are all questions that people are asking. Oftentimes, sometimes what's called a logical fallacy called whataboutism will often come into place too, with people who say, well, why should I change my behavior to positively affect climate change if if some other group or some other country won't make changes on their end, right? And so so these are all questions that come along with that, and it's one that's kind of being discussed a lot now, which is why I brought it up. Not specifically about Earth, but Earth is part of the universe and it is our home, and so therefore it is something close, emotionally close to us. That's why I brought it up. All right. Questions, comments? All right, so let me read this from Shirin. So as an example, I watched a documentary about the rabies vaccine. Before Pasteur's vaccine tests were finished, a woman brought a child to Pasteur who had been bitten by a rabid dog. The doctor working with Pasteur refused to give the vaccine. Pasteur took the risk and administered the vaccine. The problem is that if the child didn't really get rabies, he could have died. Yeah, okay. It would be very, very sad and would put the future rabies vaccine at risk and any medical advances to me. Yeah, so that's a good point. So can I assume based on this story that the child was healed because of the vaccine? That it actually worked out successfully for Pasteur, and therefore that's why. Oh, what's going on?
Yes, he was healed.
Okay. Good. So yeah, so because of that, go ahead and go back to here. Because the child was healed, we ended up having a good thing, but you're right, that had I don't want this. This bar down here is showing up for some reason. Right, but you're right that had it not worked out, and kind of again, it's one of those things where if you believe in a certain type of God or overseer of the universe, or that the universe is predetermined, then the result of the vaccine being administered is already determined. But if you believe it's random chance, then kind of random chance could have a big impact on whether or not vaccine research moves forward, right? Is kind of what you're saying. So, yeah. So it's a big risk, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Good point. I might look into that one. I might look into that question because this might be a good thing for us to discuss as part of our course this semester. Thank you for sharing that example. All right. Yeah, good question. I think discussing is a good thing because one, you can kind of listen to other people's point of views. I also believe that, especially for those of you who are much younger than me, that you are going to have an impact on the future. You know, so like even for example, I shared with you guys earlier in this call about my trip to Hatay, and I know that a lot of people probably would say, you know, what impact am I making by going over there and helping feed some people, or what impact am I going? That's because I have another friend who spent on 2 separate occasions 2 weeks down there, and was putting up tents for people. They had gotten some of these big metal frame tarp-based tents, and we're putting up. And somebody might say, well, okay, so you put up tents for a few families, but what impact are you having down there? But I think really, all of us working together, like, we can have a big impact on those things, right? I mean, the truth is, I imagine that someone sitting in a university class right now one day will be the head of a company that will do some great things, right? Somebody sitting in a university classroom right now, I guess online here, right? But somebody sitting in a university classroom right now is going to be the president of Turkey one day, right? And will have an impact on the entire country that way, right? And who knows how a discussion like this with someone may impact their ability to lead the country or the company, right, one day. So, I mean, that's my personal belief, is that I think having these discussions can be quite beneficial to us as individuals and to our families and communities and possibly even larger groups one day. But I do understand your concern, Barak. I'm not saying that I don't understand your concern. Ah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Huh. Maybe we can be involved in helping develop technology to communicate with plants and animals. But that is a good point. Yeah. Yeah, how do we relate to good and evil as it pertains to other types of living things? Yeah, that's a good question. And I think without being able to get their input and without knowing whether or not they are sentient, then that would be quite difficult. So, so maybe, yeah. So maybe we have a discussion about those things that we can have a discussion. Geçmiş olsun Shirin. So it was my first time that far east, and so it was definitely an eye-opening experience. So I hope your family is okay.
They're okay. They're okay. Just some of my relatives were hurt. Thank you.
Yeah. It's been a sad, almost a month now, right? Is it a month? No, it's a month today, isn't it? Since the first earthquake hit.
Yes, a month.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's been a long month for the entire country, but especially for those of you who have family and friends and in the regions, and we have a long healing road ahead of us, but we hope that the country can heal and get into a sense of normal eventually, but we have a long road ahead of us. All right. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your input. Thank you for those of you who, whether through microphone or through chat, were able to add to the discussion. I want to have more discussions like this. I'm very pleased by specifically the two Burak's comments, and then also Otman and Shirin, that you guys were open with us, and I can be honest that Burak, your comments about the plant kind and animal kind that are not human on this, I think this might be the first time that someone's brought that up, but it is a good point. It is a good point that how we treat the planet in terms of how we treat other animals and plants that live alongside of us is something that we need to discuss, but it is very difficult also without being able to get their input. All right, so yeah, something we maybe should consider as the times go on. All right, but if there are no other comments or no other input, we'll go ahead and end there for today. Again, I just wanted to have a brief introduction to how we will facilitate these discussions, how I will facilitate these discussions, and I hope to get more input from the rest of you throughout the rest of the semester. Okay. Thank you guys for joining. I will see you in a week, and I hope the rest of your week goes well here. All right. Thank you guys for joining.